So Naveen, thanks so much for being here. I'm assuming you have a very technical background, but when it comes to blockchain, crypto, I guess the perception of it is still very much like, oh, it must be a scam or something. And then, if you could maybe just briefly introduce yourself as well as what Tari actually is, and then maybe we can go from there.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here. So just a little bit of personal background, and then would love to tell you about Tari. So I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. I studied computer engineering at Purdue University in the US. I dropped out. I was only there for a year, and I built my first company. So I bootstrapped my first company in the music industry. So I actually had the opportunity to work with Carrie Underwood, to Linkin Park, to Slipknot, to many other amazing artists, building their websites, running their fan clubs, basically helping them connect with their superfans. And that was a really great experience for me in terms of learning how to build communities, learning how to really connect with people around their passions. And then I bootstrapped my next company in the logistics industry. I worked on a project that I put through Y Combinator, and then I started angel investing. So I'm an angel investor in many, many, many companies and projects. And then I actually got into crypto in 2016 as a miner for a project called Monero. Monero is a sort of private, very privacy-centric project. So imagine something like a Bitcoin, except it's default private. So if I send you value using Monero, or you send me value using Monero, you can't see people's transactions like you can with other blockchains. And that's where I met a really amazing entrepreneur named Ricardo, who was the former lead maintainer for Monero. So he was a part of Monero Core, very, very involved in the Monero ecosystem. And we became really good friends. And we decided to start collaborating on a project called Tari together. So the Tari project is a really interesting project in the blockchain industry. It's a totally open source, totally permissionless system. And it's what we call a new layer 1 blockchain protocol. So the idea is that when you think about the internet is comprised of many things called protocols. A protocol is a set of instructions, right? So think about it this way. When you visit a website using your web browser, how does the web browser know how to display the website in a particular way, right? It's all based on a set of instructions that everyone has sort of agreed upon. So that means if you're using Chrome or using Safari or using another web browser, the web pages will generally render the same. And that's all based on these sets of protocols. And then obviously there's programming languages and other layers to the whole system. And what's really cool about the internet is that it's permissionless. You can install a web browser on your computer, a web server on your computer, and you can build a website and you can host it off an IP address, and you don't need to ask anyone's permission to do that. And that's fundamental to how the internet works. If you think about how the traditional finance system works, it's not permissionless, right? So you need to go and ask for a bank's permission, ask for a credit card company's permission if you want to participate in the financial system. And as a result, in our world, there's many people who are unbanked or underbanked or just not able to participate for one reason or another in the global financial system. So the crypto industry was founded coming out of the 2008 financial crisis, where there was a deep loss of trust in the traditional finance system. And so the original idea for Bitcoin was you could download free software from the internet. You didn't have to ask for anyone's permission, and you could run it on your everyday PC, and you could mine Bitcoins. And by mining Bitcoins, you were also helping to secure the network. And the idea is remarkable because you have a new concept of a financial system that is based on a piece of software that's open source. So anyone can see the rules. Everyone can see the rules of this protocol. They can see that there's only going to be 21 million Bitcoins emitted over a long period of time. They can see exactly how the security model works and how consensus works. And that's really powerful because if you think about how traditional finance works, it's very opaque. You don't really know exactly how the finance system works. Yep. And sometimes you even ask government officials. There are all these kind of hilarious interviews out there where they're interviewing bureaucrats or other people related to traditional finance, and they can't even describe how it works. You know, you'll see interviews with people who run central banks, and they'll say, well, where does the money come from? And sometimes they'll be caught off guard and say, oh, we just print it.
Yeah,
right?
That's true though.
Yeah, of course. And you start to sit there and you say, well, wait a minute. That's kind of wild, because as an American, I don't get to vote on the supply of the dollar, right? So where do these dollars come from?
Yeah.
They just keep printing them. What's the end result? So if you had $100,000 in 2020 to spend, to have the exact same purchasing power here in 2024, you need $185,000.
Crazy. Yeah.
And people feel it. You go to the grocery store and you buy eggs, you buy milk, you buy whatever for your family, just to feed your family, and you can feel it. You can see the rising cost, and it makes things very difficult for people all over the world. And so that's the kind of thinking that resulted in the creation of Bitcoin. Is, well, why is that? Why do we want to continue to do it that way? This idea of fiat currencies and, you know, trusting governments with, you know, the operation and the management of financial systems. And what's happened over the course of time is, so Bitcoin started as this revolution.
Yeah.
You could download free software from the internet, no permission, install it on your PC and mine Bitcoins, and you could participate, and anyone could participate. Now back then, very few people knew about it, right? So participation was limited just on the basis of very few people knowing, right? What's happened in the crypto industry over time is that it has actually become increasingly permissioned. So when you meet with other project founders, this will be a very interesting question for you to ask, is, do you need permission to participate in the system? And for most projects that exist today, you do need permission. For example, you might need to ask them to scan your eyeball to participate in their financial system.
Right.
There is a project out there. You have to ask for permission. Think about it. It's not just something you can choose to do. You have to say to them. And sometimes they now have challenges where in some countries, they're not allowed to scan eyeballs. And so it's a permission system, right?
To steelman their argument,
Sure.
Isn't there a reason why they might need to do that as a proof of something, for example, to ensure that you can't really scam people, or just to prove your identity, for example?
Sure. So I totally understand that argument. What I would say in response is, I would say, you know, the challenge with it is that the trade-offs are very high. So now you're trusting a centralized corporation that's going to be scanning your eyeballs. What are they doing with that data? You know, how does the whole system work? Now, in their defense, they've provided a bunch of information on how this works, but they become a target. They become a target for governments and regulators and everyone else over, you know, think about the differences in opinion. You know, for example, if you live in a country like China versus a country like the US as it relates to what the definition of freedom is, right? And there's no right or wrong answer. Everyone has their own culture.
It's very different.
It's very different. These are two very different opinions. And whenever you have a centralized company, look what happened with Telegram. You have the CEO of Telegram that was literally arrested the minute his plane touched down in France.
Maybe you could just briefly explain the context of why they arrested, what their accusations are.
So the best way to think about it is, the world is a patchwork quilt of laws and regulation and perspective.
Yep.
And everyone around the world has their own point of view. Every country has their own point of view. Every culture has their own point of view. And it's beautiful because we all get to come together and connect around these different points of view and share our opinions. Sometimes what happens is you have an entrepreneur or a business that has a very strong point of view. So in the case of Telegram, Pavel, who's the CEO of Telegram, really believes very strongly in free speech. And so he's built a platform called Telegram that is very supportive of free speech. There isn't a lot of moderation, there isn't a lot of censorship on the platform. I mean, there are some limitations, but again, that's like shades of gray. It's a spectrum, right? And perhaps Telegram leans too much on one end of the spectrum versus another end of the spectrum. And that's all entirely subjective based on the regulatory or legal perspective of a given jurisdiction, right? So in the case of France, France is saying, well, wait a minute here. You're too far on the spectrum for us. And so as a result, according to them, he's broken laws in their country, and so they've arrested him.
But why is he personally liable? So why as a CEO who's created this platform, is he responsible for whatever activity goes within the Telegram ecosystem?
Well, apparently the French believe so. And that's a really good question. So I think going back to your point about the project that scans eyeballs, you know, it's very difficult when there is a single party that you can go after and now target and enforce your will in terms of how they manage people's data. And so that's the trade-off with a system like that. And is that really an acceptable trade-off? Because you inevitably may end up with circumstances where, you know, you have people whose eyeballs were scanned in one jurisdiction, and now the laws of another jurisdiction are deciding what happens with their data or what happens with their scans or with their hashes of their retina data or whatever data is being collected. And so I think that is not the way the internet works, right? So if you think again about how the internet works, you have a protocol like HTTP, which is the primary suite of protocols that power the World Wide Web. And do you need to ask permission to build a website using HTTP? No. Who controls HTTP? HTTP is an agreement. It's an agreement by many different parties to comply with this set of rules. There's a set of rules, and everyone says, you know what, we're all going to agree that, you know, when a web browsing application uses this protocol, it's going to operate in this particular way. That's basically what it's a standard, right? And what's cool about that is there's no one to go after, right? What ends up happening is, as a result of that, is governments and jurisdictions now say to website operators, hey, you know what, if you want to run a website and you want that website to be accessible in our jurisdiction, then you need to comply with our rules. So for example, if you have a website and you want it to be available in the European Union, then the European Union has, you know, privacy rules and rules related to collection of personal data that are important to them. And so if you don't comply, then that becomes a challenge for you as a website operator. But it has nothing to do with the protocol, right? So I think what's really important is to understand that the purpose of blockchain protocols, layer one protocols, is that they should end up being more like HTTP than like Telegram or a centralized business where someone can go after them and then it ends up creating risk for all of the users or challenges for all of the users. I also think that there's something deeply dystopian to scanning people's eyeballs. You know, it feels very much like something out of 1984 or any other, you know, sort of dystopian novel where all of a sudden, you know, collection, surveillance of our persons is run amok. And it seems like it's happening without any checks and balances. And I think that's strange because it's anti-human, right? So think about every human being, right? Every human being goes through their life and is on a journey, and we're all changing. You know, at every step, every day, every hour, we're evolving as human beings. And we make mistakes, you know, and that's just part of life. Now, some mistakes are critical errors, right? You know, and we've defined those suite of critical errors in society, right? For example, if someone is drinking while driving, that's a critical error in most countries around the world. It's very dangerous, and it can, you know, adversely impact many people around you, as an example. But there are many other types of mistakes that are not critical errors. You know, people make mistakes all the time.
Yeah.
Even
say stupid things. Yeah.
They say stupid things, or they do stupid things. Or another example is people even make financial mistakes. And in many countries around the world, there's a process for something called a bankruptcy, right? And that's someone who went over their skis in terms of their money, and they can now reboot. They can, start over again, right? And I think that it's really weird to create a world where we reduce every human being to entries in a database, and all of their history throughout their entire lives becomes a scarlet letter, because it starts to create a world where human beings can't be human anymore, and everyone has to be guarded, and everyone has fear of making mistakes and trying new things. And at the same time, we celebrate making mistakes and trying things, especially in entrepreneurship, right? It's like you have to make mistakes, you have to try things, because you don't know what you're doing. Most entrepreneurs don't actually know what they're doing at that moment in time as they're approaching or trying to achieve their next milestone in their business or their project or whatever it is.
Yep.
And so I think we just have to decide as a society what kind of world we want to live in. Do we want to live in a world where every single thing that you do is an entry in a database, and now when you apply for a job or you do anything in life, you go on a date. Can you imagine you go on a date and in your dating profile, they have
all your history,
your entire history, and now someone is dissecting you like at a surgical level, at an atomic level, based on everything you've ever done? Is that the world we want to live in?
But whether we want to live in one of those worlds or not, isn't that what is happening right now?
So, fair point. I think, broadly speaking, we're moving in a not so good direction as a global society. But that's why I think it's really important to work on projects that counteract that, right? So that's one of the things that's really important to contributors to the Tari project, for example. So in another major challenge with blockchain projects, and again, some of the other folks that you may be speaking to in other episodes, is that their blockchain protocols have no confidentiality features. So basically what that means is if I send you value on using the protocol, or you send me value using the protocol, anybody can see that transaction. They can see your balance. Did you know that you can Google someone's Ethereum address and get the balance of their wallet? Can you imagine?
Right.
Can you do that with your bank account?
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You can Google anyone's Bitcoin wallet address and get their balance. That is crazy. That doesn't make any sense. That's not how the real world works, right? So even though we are moving in a direction where there's a lot more surveillance, a lot less privacy, I think that's like generally true. As it relates to money and value, people are pretty private.
Yeah,
and
it's like people will come after you if they know how much you make.
Of course, it's a security risk for people. It's a scarlet letter issue. What I do with my own money, as long as it's legal in my jurisdiction, why is that anyone's business?
So I guess there's that fine balance, because you do want to be transparent, because the whole idea of blockchain is to be transparent so that people know that there's like no fraudulent transactions going on and things like that.
That's a misconception.
Interesting. Yep. Could
Okay.
you elaborate on
So
that?
yeah. So actually, if you read the original Bitcoin paper, there's a section on privacy. So Satoshi Nakamoto actually discussed the importance of privacy, and there's a meaningful conversation on Bitcoin Talk between Satoshi and other contributors and interested parties in Bitcoin discussing the importance of privacy and whether Bitcoin privacy is sufficient. And what's happened is from that time forward is all the modern day protocols have basically abandoned efforts with regards to privacy, or most have. And the end result is this very strange world where now you have this particular view that, blockchains are supposed to be transparent. It's like, well, no, that's an implementation decision. That's a design choice to say that, the system is going to be default public or default surveillance versus default confidential. But again,
I'm not the only one who's thinking this way, right?
I agree.
Because that's that's what I hear everyone saying, that finally we have some transparency because everything has been so opaque.
Right. So what I would say there is I would go back to first principles thinking.
Right.
Okay. So as a product person, I always think about meeting people where they are.
Yep.
So when I think about it from that point of view, tell me the online tool that I can use to see your bank balance right now. Tell me the online tool. Tell me the online tool that I can use to see your credit card transaction history right now in real time, and that I can use to track it not only past but also future for all time without even asking your permission.
Yeah.
Tell me the tool that I can use to spy on every single manner and approach and way that you choose to spend your money.
Oh, governments will love that.
Well, interesting that you say that. But now think about it from a business point of view. Is there a company out there that wants everyone to know, what customer A pays versus customer B or customer C? Could you imagine a world where, let's use an airline as an example. Airlines have loyalty programs. Every airline has a loyalty program, right? And they are very careful about, revealing who is, has different status in the airline. You go to the airport, and even when they show the upgrade, thing, they don't put the person's full name.
Nope.
They'll put like first initial, last name maybe, or first part of the name. They obfuscate. Because why? Could you imagine the disaster if Delta Airlines published publicly all their diamond medallion list and the field day that American Airlines and United Airlines, their direct competitors, would have?
Oh yeah.
So I would argue that systems that don't have confidentiality features are actually incompatible with capitalism. How do you run a business?
Yep.
It doesn't make any sense. So I think that there certainly is a group of people that believe that transparency is great. And I think that the way the system should work is it should be default confidential, but the person should be able to reveal if they want to. And there's lots of good reasons for this. For example, a nonprofit. A nonprofit may want to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, here's the donations we've received, and here's how we've spent the money on behalf of the charity or the cause, right? So there are examples where it makes a lot of sense, but broadly speaking, that's not how the traditional finance system works. And I'm not convinced that having it be default transparent is better. I actually think it's a step in the wrong direction. So Tari, there are three elements of Tari that I think are really important and make it very different from any other project out there. So the first thing is Tari is a return to permissionlessness. This idea that you can download free software from the internet. We have this amazing mining application called Tari Universe. It's beautiful, and it is the easiest to use crypto application ever created.
Maybe just briefly explain what mining means for people who might not get it.
Yeah. So the concept of mining is sort of a collective approach to securing a blockchain network using a consensus mechanism called proof of work. So the basic idea is that you're contributing computational power to solve very complex math equations, and whoever solves that complex math equation first wins the block. It's sort of like a multiplayer game. And the idea is that all of the computational power that was used to find that block across the whole network becomes the security parameters for the network. So in order for you to change the state of the blockchain, you basically have to go back in time to the block that you want to change the state, and you have to amass all of the computational power used to not only solve that block, but all the blocks thereafter. So it becomes expensive. It becomes expensive, costly to attack the network and change the source of truth. So the way to think about it is it's a ledger, and basically it's an ongoing list of transactions. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that the state is high integrity. You want everyone to know that they can really trust that, it says, the ledger currently says that Naveen has 5, whatever the token is. Okay, well, is that high integrity? Is that trustworthy? Is that true? So a way to think about blockchain systems is they're sort of like truth machines, right? And it's just a different style of truth machine. Instead of trusting a centralized company, let's pretend like it's concert tickets, so a company like Ticketmaster, well, Ticketmaster controls their database, right? So you're trusting them. They're the ones who are telling you whether you have the ticket or you don't have the ticket. In this case, you're not trusting a centralized party, you're trusting a network. You're trusting this whole group of people that are running the network and mining and contributing to the security model of the network. And everyone has a copy of the ledger, and you can see for yourself, like, okay, the copies of the ledger are the same, and everyone says that I have 5 of whatever token it is. So it's a very different way of creating a very high integrity system. So what's happened in our industry is when you want to participate in a new blockchain protocol, you have to ask for someone's permission first. So let's pretend like you want to buy some Ethereum. How do you buy Ethereum? Let's pretend like you have nothing. You have no account at an exchange, you have no wallet, you have nothing. It is very difficult to buy Ethereum from scratch. It's very difficult. You have to go and open an account at an exchange. You have to KYC. You have to provide your government identity. You have to set up your bank account or put in your credit card information. You then have to buy. You have to move your fiat currency to the system. It's many steps. It's complicated. And you're asking for permission. Now contrast that with what you had when Bitcoin first launched. You just download the software. You download the software and you mine on your computer. That was how the whole industry started. We think it's mission critical to get back to that. We should get back to that. So the way that Tari is engineered is Tari has 2 layers to the system. The layer 1 is proof of work. You download this beautiful software from the internet. It's remarkable. The design and the ease of use. So here are the exact steps. You download Tari Universe from the internet for free. Costs you nothing. You install it on your Mac or PC, your existing computer. You load up the application. It's going to sync. Takes a little bit of time to sync. And there is a single button. Start mining. That's it.
Right.
It's that simple. And we think that's really important because when you want to create a new financial system and you want to create something that is accessible for everyone, you need to make it very easy. If it's not easy, you're not going to get anyone to do it. And so that's a core fundamental thing for all the people who contribute to Tari. The second element of Tari that's very unique is that Tari has confidentiality features. So the way Tari works is it's, again, an internet protocol. It's fully permissionless. It's open source, just like HTTP. And anyone can participate. Again, just like HTTP. But it's default confidential. So every transaction on the network, on the protocol, is default confidential, just like your credit card transactions are, or your bank account wires are, or any other financial transaction that you decide to conduct. Now, there's a balancing act here because compliance with regulations is very important. So the way Tari is engineered is the core underlying protocol is default confidential on a peer-to-peer basis. That means on a person-to-person basis. However, developers on the system, let's pretend like you wanted to invent your own token of whatever token you wanted to create on the Tari system. You can do that, and you can design your smart contract in a manner, your program on the network, in a manner where you, as the issuer of that token, have full visibility into the transaction graph for your token. So therefore, you can comply with the regulations of your jurisdiction, because what is legal in Japan or Singapore may be different than what's legal in America or in Canada. And that's the way it should work, just like HTTP works. What's legal in Japan or Singapore related to running a website is different than what is legal in Europe, in the EU, or in Canada.
Right.
So to us, it's create a system that allows anyone to participate, make it wildly easy to use, easier to use than anything else out there, make it fully permissionless. You don't need to say, "Mother, may I please scan my eyeball?" Or, "Please, sir, may I open an account with you?" Why do we want to live that way in this industry? That's not how Bitcoin was. So why do we expect new protocols to be successful with that approach? It's harder to open an account at a centralized exchange in many jurisdictions than it is to open a traditional bank account.
That's actually true. I mean, that I think anybody can agree with.
So why? Why do we want to build an industry that's just held captive by the traditional finance system? Does that make any sense? What's the purpose? Why are we all here? Right? So another hypothesis we have within the Tari community is, what if blockchain systems are generational, like social networks? So if you think about the history of social networks, we started off with Friendster, right? So Friendster was the original social network.
Yep.
Then we went to MySpace, then Facebook, then Instagram, then Snapchat, then TikTok, right?
Yep.
And of course, there are different social networks in different places around the world, of course. But those are generally have been the progression. And each one of these social networks appeals to a different generation. I'm old, and so I grew up during the Friendster/MySpace era, to date myself.
Right.
And I remember when Facebook launched, I no longer had a .edu email address. I couldn't access Facebook because Facebook was gated based on having a .edu email address at the beginning. And I remember I was working with a band, and I actually drove down to Facebook headquarters at that time, and they had to add me to Facebook because I didn't have a .edu email, but I needed to be on the system in order to make things work for the band. And so they manually added me. Yeah. And so I just think about that a lot. I think, wow, the people who were using MySpace was a different generation than the people who grew up using Facebook. And so today in the blockchain industry, how does someone who's a part of Gen Z or a Gen Alpha person participate in this world? Well, the expectation from the industry's point of view is they should just buy existing tokens. They shouldn't be ground floor for anything. They should buy existing tokens. And I think
a lot of them do, to be fair.
Fewer than you may think.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So at least the data that I've seen, and admittedly, some of it is anecdotal, but I don't think you have the level of participation from Gen Z and Gen Alpha than people in the industry would lead you to believe. I think that there isn't as much participation, and even look around at the conference today, and just see what's the age of people here. Do you see a lot of Gen Zs running around or Gen Alphas running around?
Nope.
If you go to other blockchain conferences, look into it. Just look around and people watch and see who is here. It's not the younger generation. Why? I think that it's hard for them to participate. So if you think about it, we already just discussed how difficult it is to set up an account with an exchange, and the number of steps it takes to actually get into the industry. Well, what if all of those amazing people who are part of next generations, up and coming generations, could just download software for free from the internet and be a part of something from the ground floor, be a part of something from day one? We think that's really cool, right? And so that's part of our overall hypothesis for something like Tari. So the final thing about Tari that makes it really remarkable is it's the best developer platform in the world. And there's one reason for that. So growing up building startups, I only really had one job before I started my first company. I was a bank teller for a summer. That was my only job. And then I quit and started building companies when I was 19. And the most important thing, I think, for any entrepreneur is customer acquisition, is distribution. Right? And you guys for Asian Boss, you have a platform. This is a platform for people to learn about new things, and it's a part of people getting sort of accustomed to new things, and that can be user acquisition for people, right? And that's important. It's really important. It's the most important thing for any entrepreneur. And if you think about how the Web 2 world works, when you build an application for, say, Apple's platform for iOS or for Google, Google Play Store, Google Android, why do developers pay so much money to these big companies, right? There's a lot of debate out there about Apple charging 30% of gross revenue for every app developer for every dollar over $1 million, right? I think that's the current rules. It's a lot of money. Why do they pay? One answer is distribution. That's why. Because how many iOS devices are there?
Right.
Hundreds of millions, maybe a billion, I don't know, huge number. I think there's a billion Android phones out there, but I think there's fewer number of iOS devices. Think about someone who builds a game for PlayStation 5 or builds a game for the Nintendo Switch or builds a game for Steam, right? All of these platforms have enormous amounts of distribution and the developers are happy to pay. Or maybe not so happy, but they
have to pay.
They have to pay. They have to pay. If you want the distribution, you have to pay.
Yeah.
So now imagine you're building an application for a blockchain protocol. How do you get distribution? It's very hard. Very, very hard to get distribution. And the underlying protocols do not provide any assistance or help with distribution. So what their goal, their thinking, is that developers are going to build amazing applications and they're going to onboard net new users for their protocol. So the developers are tasked with doing two things. One is getting users for their application, but two is getting users for the protocol, which is an incredible amount of work. It's very, very hard to do.
Yep.
And here's the crazy part is let's pretend like you do that and you onboard some new users. Who owns those users? If the protocols have no confidentiality features, the protocol owns the users. The app doesn't own the user. So every time you onboard a new user, everyone sees that you onboarded this new user. They know the value of the user. They know how frequently they're transacting. They know the revenue being generated. They know everything about the user instantly. What does that mean? That means that competing developers can come and poach your users in real time. It's crazy. It makes no sense.
Right.
So
that's actually happening.
That happens every day.
Right.
They call it a vampire attack in the industry. It's called a vampire attack.
But isn't it the idea that in order to grow this protocol together, like the incentives are all aligned, that you're not supposed to do that?
Supposed to do it. The data's there, right? The data's there, and if the data's there,
Human nature takes over.
Of course, people are going to take advantage of that, right? So just to circle back. So today, the way the world looks is I'm a developer. I'm going to build an application for existing blockchain protocol. I don't get to own my user, and the protocol doesn't add any value as it relates to distribution. And I'm tasked with doing all the heavy lifting, essentially, to bring users into the system.
Currently, what kind of incentive do you get for, like, what's your payoff here?
Right. So a lot of the blockchain protocols have foundations, and they offer grants. But I don't know that developers really want grants. I think developers want to achieve greatness. I think they want to make their dreams come true. I think they want to get millions and millions of people to use their amazing applications. When's the last time you heard of Apple paying a grant? Does Google pay grants?
Nope.
I mean, they might have some small program, but this is not the natural state of things, right? So why in this industry is it so normal, to pay grants to developers just to get them to build on your protocol? It means that the protocol is not offering enough value, right? Because other platforms like iOS or Android, the developers are willing to pay. So here, no one's willing to pay. You have to pay them, right? So how do we solve this problem? Well, so I can tell you how the Tari community is hoping to solve the problem. So Tari is proof of work. We have this beautiful application called Tari Universe. It's unbelievably simple to use. You download it for free from the internet. You install it on your Mac or PC, and you click one button to start mining. Now let me tell you what the future is going to look like. So in the future, the community is going to add an app launcher to Tari Universe. So now someone downloads the software for free from the internet, they install it, they can one-click start mining, and they can earn Tari rewards, earn Tari tokens based on their contribution to the network, helping to secure the network. Then they can take tokens, their token rewards in Tari, and imagine an interface that looks almost like an app store directly in Tari Universe. And they can start using those applications right there. It solves two problems. Number one is discovery. So now as a user, I can actually see the whole world of Tari applications right before my very eyes. That's a huge problem in the current state of the industry. How do you discover a new application? You can ask this question to some of your other guests. and see how they respond. I don't know that you'll be satisfied with their answer, right?
It's just, it's just a mess.
It's a disaster.
You can't find anything. Yeah.
It's a disaster, and it's a risk. If you Google an application, you might get a scam ad.
Yeah.
And you click on the link and connect your wallet. Next thing you know, your assets have been drained. Happens every day.
Really?
Oh yeah, huge problem.
That's crazy.
Because there's no trusted or known discovery mechanism. Okay, so it solves a huge problem for the user, but guess what? It solves an enormous problem for developers. It gives them distribution. So now within this interface, you can see the entire world of Tari applications right before your very eyes. And let's pretend like you're a developer and you're launching a new application. Well, there's opportunity potentially for your application to be listed there. And then all of a sudden you can get your first 100 users, your first 1,000 users, maybe someday your first 100,000 users through that approach. And to us, that's remarkable because that's solving the number one pain point for developers. Developers are willing to learn any programming language. They're willing to learn the nuances of any system if that system is going to help them achieve their dream.
Right. But they're not marketers. They're not.
They may not be. They may not be. And marketing and how you communicate is a critical skill, but the platform should be doing everything in its power to help developers along the way. So those are the three things that make Tari fundamentally different from any other project you're going to speak to.
Right. So then what kind of sort of critical mass do you need in order to get there? So in other words, this ecosystem or the community to be at that, where's that escape velocity?
Yeah. So, we've been running a lot of experiments within the community to try to figure this out.
Yeah.
And look, the Tari community is small today, but what's really cool is we did a demo, showed people what it looks like, announced it on our socials, etc. And it's pretty remarkable. We got 150,000 people to join a wait list for this piece of software in 2 weeks.
That's not normal.
I don't think that's normal.
150,000.
150,000. It's growing by thousands every day. I think that's pretty special because I think it means that people are excited about it.
Yeah.
And people are telling their friends about it. And people are hitting us up constantly. So we're doing alpha testing for the software. And so we've invited some people in the community who are very passionate, like the super fans of Tari, right? People who are very, very passionate about Tari. We said, hey, would you like to try it? And the reaction is overwhelming. I mean, people are so excited. They're like, oh, you sent me the link? I'm going to drive home right now. I'm going to stop what I'm doing to install this and try it. And you know what it reminds me of? I remember, again, I'm old. I remember.
You don't look old.
Well, I'll tell my wife you said that. I remember going to CompUSA the night that Windows 95 came out. Okay, so I remember I was there. It was midnight.
Right.
It was midnight, and I remember going to CompUSA to buy an operating system, and there were lines. There were people waiting to buy it. It was like, what? And it feels like a smaller version of that. Like it feels like, okay, people are excited because they're passionate and they believe that there's a bigger opportunity here. Like maybe this could be the birth of a new financial system that is fair and more accessible and truly permissionless and really honors the ideology, the philosophy behind Bitcoin, but does it in a completely new way. And maybe this is something that people who are not currently involved in the industry can participate in. People who are curious. I'm sure you have many people in your audience that are curious and are interested in learning more. Well, if you make them jump through 10 fiery hoops to participate, maybe they won't participate because it's just too difficult. It's just too much of a pain in the ass. But if they can download free software from the internet, they can install it on their existing computer, their Mac or PC, and they can click one button to participate, maybe there are more people who will do that. And so that's kind of where we are right now. And who knows how it will pan out? Who knows how it will turn out? We are very excited to have the opportunity to put it out there.
So you talk about super fans that are so passionate about this new product. Like, what do you think makes them a super fan? Like, why are they so excited? Is it because you're solving that's this major pain point for them?
I think there are a lot of reasons. I think everyone has their own reason. To give you a band analogy, I think that everyone has a favorite song. And I think the same is true here. So you have people who might be really into confidentiality and freedom. There's definitely a group of super fans that really believe in that. There's a group of people who love design and think that members of the Tari community, contributors to Tari, are creating the most beautiful applications out there, and they just want to be the first to try them out.
And on the flip side, do you have a lot of like critics or skeptics who might, because I'm sure you try to get different perspectives and then try to like address all of their points, but what would you say are some of the biggest sort of skepticism around this type of things?
Yeah, I think there's, the way we think about it is there are design decisions in something like Tari that people may take issue with. So for example, proof of work systems are not very high performance. So they're slow. And so when you think about a Bitcoin transaction or an Ethereum transaction, when Ethereum was proof of work, they're not very fast, and they're not very scalable either. So the way that the Tari community has addressed this problem is by making Tari a dual layer system. So there's an underlying system, a foundational layer that is layer 1 and uses proof of work because of the distribution benefits, because of the onboarding benefits, because you can create this beautiful software like Tari Universe. So that's the trade-off, right? But then you need to have a second layer that's built on top of the first one that is very high performance, is very low cost to use, is super scalable. And so there may be people out there who take issue with that. I think there are people who may disagree with the concept of how do you define permissionlessness.
Exactly.
And again, for me, the definition is very simple. It's, did I have to ask anyone's permission or not? I don't know how else you would define it, but they may have a different definition, which is fine. But to me, if I have to go and provide my government-issued identification in order to participate in your system, and there's a chance that someone's going to say, no, you can't, that doesn't feel very permissionless to me. That feels like permissioned. That feels like traditional finance.
Maybe one of the arguments that I could potentially steel man is that, maybe because if you're trying to do something illegal, or you're just one of the bad actors, and they try to access, that's why they wouldn't, they always ask me, even like at a traditional bank, are you dealing with anyone from Iran or something like that, when we need to send the money to our reporters. But they're like, you can't even transact with those people. Totally. And I'm like, well, so clearly that's very frustrating.
Of course.
Because we have reporters that we train, like citizen reporters, and then because they happen to live in, like Afghanistan, Iran, or like a Turkey or something. But then I could also understand why at that sort of like a centralized governmental or institutional banking level, they have to take into account that risk. Of
course.
That somebody could be financing terrorism or something, right?
Of course. So, from my point of view as a contributor to the Tari project, I think compliance with these regulations is super important. Like, it's very, very, very important. And a lot of these sorts of questions, I think, have already been answered pretty well around Bitcoin, right? Because anyone can be a Bitcoin miner, and you end up with a similar sort of set of questions.
Right.
And so the way that governments around the world have adapted is they've said, okay, well, you might have some Bitcoin, but if you really want to do anything with that Bitcoin, like, for example, turn it into US dollars or spend it in some way, then you're going to have to go and set up an account with some sort of on-ramp or off-ramp, and then that organization is responsible for ensuring that you are compliant, with whatever the jurisdiction's rules and regulations are. And at least I can just speak for myself personally, I think that's fine. I think that's totally fine. And I think it's really important that every country be able to enforce rule of law, however they've defined rule of law, right? I think that's like super important. But again, I'll throw it back to the HTTP example, and I'll say, well, okay, so you have a protocol, and the protocol is open source software. I mean, the only reason it is interesting at all is because there's some number of people that have decided that this rule set makes sense to them, right? Otherwise, if no one agrees that the rule set makes sense to them, then there's nothing to be concerned about, right? Because no one's running the software. So if there are people out there who are running the software, and those people decide that they want to build an application on top of the system, or they want to do something with Tari rewards tokens, or whatever they want to do, it's up to them to comply, just like it is up to the web developer to comply with local regulations around building a website. I'm sure here in Korea, there's very specific rules and regulations around operating a website, just like there are in the European Union, just like there are in the United States. And so I think it's really, really important. I'll give you an example of something that's a US rule is ADA compliance, Americans with Disabilities Act, right? So websites, generally speaking, need to work with, for example, readers. So if you're blind, you can actually still parse the website information, right? That's an accommodation for someone who has a disability. And that's an example of a law that's on the books in the United States that's very important. And but what does that have to do with HTTP, right? Protocol doesn't decide whether that sort of accommodation should be made or not, right? And that's kind of the way I think members of the Tari community view it.
I think it makes perfect sense, because at a protocol level, why should there be any kind of a permission?
Right.
When, as you said, on the upper layer, like I think the people just probably tend to conflate the two, maybe.
They totally do. I think that's a major issue, is that you'll have eyeball scanning guys go out and say, well, this is a protocol. And it's like, is it? Well, why can't people in this country have their eyeballs scanned? Okay, well, and that's not an OFAC country, right? That's not Iran or some other country. It's a country that just decided that we don't want to allow people to have their eyeballs scanned.
As you said, if people actually read that white paper on Bitcoin, and there was this whole thing about like privacy and confidentiality and everything, but then is there something about human nature that just, I don't care, like maybe as, to me this is like a Pareto principle or something, where the power always gets centralized. Maybe there's something about human nature. So similarly, when it started out as a completely permissionless protocol, but then as the crypto industry evolves, why does it automatically just seem to head in that direction? Is it because I'm sure that everybody has good intentions?
Sure, of course. I think that's a really, really good question. I think that there are a couple reasons. So number one is confidentiality technologies, privacy technologies are hard. It's hard to implement these technologies. And there's many trade-offs in implementing these technologies. There may be trade-offs in terms of user experience. There may be trade-offs in terms of trust. So there's many different trade-offs in the design of these sorts of technologies. And I think in the desire to just ship something and build something and put it out there, I think people are willing to just move fast and break things.
That sounds familiar.
It is absolutely. So the Tari community has been working on Tari now for almost 7 years.
Wow.
So it's taken a tremendous amount of time and effort, because it is very difficult, I think, to implement something like this and still have that really beautiful kind of magical user experience. So I think that's like one answer to the question. I think the other answer to the question is, in the crypto industry, when people have a lot of tokens and their net worth is denominated in a particular token in sort of a very significant way, they tend to have blinders on for anything else. They start to believe that, oh, well, this approach must be the right approach because 80% of my net worth is denominated in this approach. And you see that in other areas too. It's no different than someone who's got, a huge percentage of their net worth tied up in Tesla stock or tied up in something else. It's just people start to, become connected with that thing, and they stop being able to see the possibility that something new might emerge.
Right.
And what I always believe is I believe this very simple thing, which is backed by data, which is that in the technology industry, things generally don't last very long, right? So broadly speaking, if you look at like the S&P 500 from the 90s, what percentage of those companies are still in the S&P 500 today?
Right.
And the answer is somewhere between 20 and 30%. I don't have the exact number, but it's somewhere in that
Sounds
range.
About right, yeah.
And you think about all the examples of great companies of the past that were the leaders of their day that are no longer the leaders, right? And I think as human beings, we tend to look at what's happening now in the current moment and assume that it's always going to be that way. Well, I'm always going to use Google for search.
Well, not anymore. I mean, people actually use ChatGPT more.
Of course, they're using Perplexity, they're using Claude, they're using ChatGPT, 100%. So, but this is a really good example. So again, I grew up in an era when we had AltaVista, we had Excite, InfoSeek, Dogpile, Yahoo. There was many search engines. Why did Google win? Well, Google won because it was a better product.
Yeah.
It was more convenient, right? So if you remember searching on an AltaVista, you had to it was a skill to know how to search.
That's true.
That was a skill. Then when Google came out with their better natural language processing and just the way that they had spidered more of the internet, they'd indexed more of the internet, it just worked. You would type in a query, and if you remember, they were cheeky about it. They had the "I'm feeling lucky" button.
Oh, that's right. I remember that.
And because they were like, we're so good that you don't even need to see the results. You're feeling lucky, and you're going to get exactly what you searched for.
Yep.
And that was the difference. And fast forward to today, do people use those alternative search engines really? No. Google is the largest search engine in the world, right? And so I think that is just something that people need to really understand deep down, is that just because something right now looks like it's winning or maybe it's worth a lot to you, doesn't mean that that's always going to be true. And there almost always will be new technology that comes out of left field and changes how we view the world. We just went through this together with ChatGPT. We all just experienced this. Literally in the last year and a half or however long it's been.
Literally just a year and a half.
Not very long. Okay,
It changed everything.
It changed everything. This just happened.
Yeah.
So how can someone believe that an existing protocol, an existing token is going to be the lifeblood for everyone on Earth forever? I just don't know that that's like a rational way of thinking.
Right.
Because technology just evolves so fast.
Right. But that being said, isn't this industry or the protocols themselves are still in the very early stages anyway?
True.
So you need to almost set the right tone. But
Agree.
at the same time, because of the establishment or the incumbent protocols, and they're still far from getting the mainstream adoption.
100%.
I think it's quite interesting though. So if you play this out, and imagine that we live in not in your version of the future, which is everything's permissionless, but then even at the protocol layer,
It's
everything
permissioned.
does require permission, and it gets more and more stringent.
Yes, over
Like,
time.
what would that world look like?
I think that's a pretty scary world. The problem is what is right and what is wrong is different depending on where you are in the world and different depending on the time. You know, a while ago, marijuana was illegal in the state of California.
That's right.
Okay, so you would get arrested if the police discovered that you had even a small amount of marijuana on you, or, you know, God forbid you were selling it or whatever you were doing, right? And it was illegal. Many people were locked up. Thousands of people went to jail around marijuana-related offenses.
That's crazy to think about it now.
Okay, and it was wrong. And society broadly viewed it as, this is wrong. These are criminals. You are a criminal because you had marijuana on you. Fast forward to today, what's wrong with that? You can go to a shop. They have dispensaries everywhere.
Yeah.
You go to a shop, you can buy. You don't need anything. They'll sell you whatever you want. Oh, you want a brownie? We'll sell you a brownie. How about that? You want a chocolate bar? What would you like? You know, oh, you want this brand? You want the, you know, whatever, insert rapper's name, you know, brand of marijuana? We'll sell it to you. No problem. And that's the challenge with the idea of fully permissioned systems that are transparent, is what is right and wrong is changing as society makes different decisions, you know, as morality sort of evolves. It's right and wrong. Could you imagine if when you want to visit another country, they're scanning all of your past purchases and deciding whether to let you in? And, oh, I can't visit that country because I'm flagged based on this transaction I did 15 years ago. Could you imagine how any government authority would evolve over time? You know, so today in the United States, you know, generally speaking, you know, the IRS only goes back, I think, 7 years, something like that, you know, for analyzing, you know, your past income or, you know, whatnot for the purpose of paying tax. But what if everything is recorded on a blockchain system that's default surveillance and they can go back 45 years? That's wild. Well, clearly it shows in the database that you underpaid in this year. What if it was an innocent mistake? You're going to owe 45 years of penalties and interest? It just creates a world that is not built for humans. Human beings make mistakes. Human beings are evolving. You know, what is right and wrong is evolving. What is right and wrong is dependent on where you are. And if we live in a world where everything is just out in the open as it relates to how we spend money, I think it makes it very difficult to be a human. And I think that's sad. And that's a very sad outcome for all of us.
There are a lot of voices in this industry that agree with that type of, man, if we let this play out, you know, it's almost like looking at an episode of Black Mirror.
100%.
But worse.
Worse, yeah.
But, like, realistically, do a lot of people agree with you that if we let this play out, that's the future that we could end up having?
There definitely are people out there who would agree with all of the points that I'm making. But it's fewer than you may think. And I think a lot of it has to do with, again, people's, what we call in the industry, bag bias. You know, if I have a huge number of tokens for a particular protocol that doesn't support these features, you know, I just want my number to go up. I want to make more money. I've already purchased the car and the yacht and the home and have decided who my trophy wife is going to be on the basis of the number changing, right? And so I think that is blinding for people, and they start to ignore some of these challenges because it's not their problem. One of the most common responses to this kind of discussion, this discourse in the industry is, well, Naveen, what do you have to hide? Right? And my response to that always is, well, it's not about that. It's not about that. It's about the fact that in most countries, the legislators, the lawmakers in any given country will continuously pass new laws, but they don't take laws off the books.
I think that is, I mean, I used to be a former lawyer.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah. So, and I happen to know that it literally just piles on. They never get rid of it.
Yeah.
So that's why the legislation, it gets thicker and thicker every year.
Yeah. So there's a saying, that at the end of the day, almost anything you're doing is breaking some law somewhere, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that's wild. I think that's wild to think about because, it just means that you're going to end up in a world where, it's another level of government control, right? And you're going to end up with scenarios, things that happen out there in the world where you say, gosh, why are they enforcing this law from 65 years ago? It's a law. You broke the law. You weren't supposed to do that.
Yeah, it's quite interesting to think about. So you think that any government or any party agencies that want to enforce these type of thing in the future is because they can access all this information.
The more information they have, the more that they have evidence and proof that in their eyes you may have done something wrong. And I think it's anti-freedom. I think at the end of the day, I am pro-human and I am pro-freedom. And that's why I choose to contribute to the Tari project, is because I believe that this project is pro-human and I think it's pro-freedom.
So where is that line exactly though? So for example, let's say we try to define the parameter of I totally agree that some things should absolutely remain private. And you mentioned your bank balance, your transaction history, maybe even your dating history.
Sure.
But then where is that line?
Yeah.
Because then people are like, okay, so, or are you saying that, well, pretty much when it comes to your personal information, it should be, as much of it should remain private and confidential?
Yeah, so I think a way to think about this is when you design a secure system, when you're using like cryptography for something, it is kind of like a binary thing in the sense that, for example, what a lot of regulators or people around the world sometimes talk about is they'll talk about backdoors.
Yep.
They'll say, hey, okay, this thing is encrypted, but how about you give us a master key that we can use? Because they might be breaking the law, right? So I want to give you a really good example of this. Apple, over the last several years has been debating what to do about the risks of child pornography on iPhoto, and iCloud. Okay, so if someone has illegal content, illegal material,
right,
and it's stored on iCloud, what is Apple's responsibility?
It's a very interesting question. Yeah.
Okay, so let me tell you what Apple decided.
Okay.
So originally what Apple was working on is they were working on a really sophisticated piece of technology that would essentially in real time scan the content you were making on your phone to determine whether it was illegal content. So the way they were doing it is through essentially a form of pattern matching. So what they would do is there's like these databases of illegal content that exist out there. And Apple would take hashes of those images, and if you had one of those images on your device or up on their servers, they would flag it, they would manually review it, and then they would alert the authorities or do whatever they need to do in that circumstance.
Right.
And so Apple spent an enormous amount of time and effort building this system. And then they announced the system, and privacy advocates around the world were up in arms because it's a slippery slope.
It is.
Okay,
Very
so
slippery
how
slope.
do you define what is illegal content?
Right.
What is illegal in one country or one jurisdiction is going to be different than what is illegal in another jurisdiction.
Yep.
And it can even be legality may change from,
Obviously, we're not talking about child because that is illegal, period.
100%.
But
I agree with you.
You're right. There's a lot of gray areas where.
Yes. It's not specifically about the child pornography, which everyone can agree is terrible and illegal and has no place in our world. But when you give governments around the world sort of this level of power, then all of a sudden, and Apple realized, they said, well, wait, we're going to become a target. So they abandoned the effort. They entirely.
Right.
They entirely abandoned the effort to the dismay of all the child protection advocates, all these other people out there. It was a lose-lose situation.
Right, right.
Okay, so basically Apple did not implement that technology. Apple still has, moderation in place where if they detect in the system, it's certainly illegal to have illegal content up on iCloud. If it's ever discovered or determined, then, Apple does what it needs to do. But Apple is not scanning your devices in real time to identify this sort of material.
Right.
And again, it comes down to a choice. Do we want to live in a world where everyone may be a bad apple, in which case we're going to just take everyone's freedom away? Or do we want to live in a world where we sort of all acknowledge and agree that most people are good apples? There are some bad apples out there, of course, but most people are good apples, and the freedom is more important. And we want to create a world where people can live their lives, right? And so I look at those kinds of decisions, and I think about that a lot, because
why do you think about that a lot? What is it about maybe your background, maybe the fact that you're American and you're maybe inherently distrustful of your government? Why do you spend time thinking about this when not many people, as you said, don't really seem to spend a lot of time thinking about this?
I think that, for me personally, this is something that matters to me because it's a part of legacy for me, right? Like if I want to go and build something in my life, there's lots of different companies I could start or products I could build. But this particular project is important because it scratches an itch for me in terms of something that could stand the test of time, something that could become, has the potential to become a way of thinking, a philosophy, a rule set that hopefully one day millions of people go, hey, you know what? That's a good rule set. That's a rule set that I subscribe to too. And I think that's the right one. And I just love the idea in a world of AI and, autonomous agents and drones flying overhead, that someone out there is working on pro-human technology, right? Because I feel like most technology that's being developed today is not actually pro-human, it's pro-bot. And so
even though in theory they're being designed to help humans and then make things more efficient and make it more productive, so that it supposedly helps out, with your time management, you're free to do whatever. But then that's still, at the end of the day, you're saying that's becoming more pro-bot.
I mean, it's interesting, right? So there's no debate that the amount of leverage a human can gain from using these tools is extraordinary. People's ability to write software, create any kind of thing, whether it's art or writing or whatever, using these tools, the ability to learn. You can literally have GPT or Claude become your teacher.
Right.
There's all kinds of remarkable things you can do with the technology. There's no debate about any of that. I think that on the internet, the sort of yin and the yang here is that that's the positive outcome.
Yep.
And by the way, there's some negative externalities from that outcome too, around, well, what are people going to do, right? Like,
absolutely.
So, I mean, there's a reason why someone like Sam Altman, who's the co-founder of OpenAI, is also funding UBI experiments, right?
Yep.
There's a reason why.
Yep.
Because someone like that realizes, wait a minute here, what are people going to do?
Yep.
If people can basically describe a piece of software, then, does that mean the world doesn't need as many software engineers in the future, for example? Or look at, in the US, we have a scenario where in fast food restaurants, because the cost of doing business has gone up so much, they've started just putting vending machines. They have kiosks.
Oh,
you walk into a McDonald's and it's a kiosk. The only people in the back are the people making the food, right? So the number of humans that are working, that are employed, is declining.
Yeah.
Right?
That's exactly happening in Asia as well.
100%.
Yeah.
And from a business point of view, it makes sense. But from a human standpoint, it doesn't really make sense, right? So that's one of the trade-offs there. Okay, let me describe another trade-off on the other side, which is, on the internet, if everyone is an autonomous agent, then how do you know if someone is actually connecting with whatever you're building, right? If it's just a bunch of bots, that are transacting or doing things, then when does the human passion, the human connection, the emotional connection, when does that come into play? Or does it never come into play going forward, right? And that's a negative outcome, because I think human beings are curious. Human beings want to experience new things. They want to learn. You don't want to have a proxy that's experiencing your whole life for you. What do we want to live in a world that looks like the movie WALL-E, where we just are laying back on our chairs while the Earth is destroyed? I just think that's dark. That's not a very positive, optimistic outcome. I'm an optimist, and I would rather see a world where human beings can participate in a system, be a part of something, feel connected to it, feel something, feel emotionally connected to it, build camaraderie, build friendships, a system that is protecting them, keeping them safe, and allowing them to be human beings and in all of the glorious ways that we all get to be human beings. And I just think that building that sort of technology is really freaking important. So that's why I choose to do that.
So this is your mission that you've been working on for a long time.
Yeah.
And I hope it really resonates with a lot of people. But
we hope so too.
Do you have any future plans? Where do you go from even building that app store features within the Tari product? Yeah. So where do you go from there?
Tari is an open source software project. I think that around open source software projects, you have traditions that emerge and sort of norms, social contracts that begin to form. And so we think a lot about that and how to collaborate with the community to co-create those sorts of concepts within the Tari sort of world. And the reason why that's important is, for example, when someone first discovers Tari, maybe it's 10 years in the future or some longer time horizon. How do they experience it? Is it as easy as it is today, where they can just download something from the internet for free, click a button and go? Maybe I'm no longer involved. Maybe it's a new group of contributors. And how do you create a set of traditions? I think of it almost like a wedding. Weddings are rich with tradition in any culture, every culture, and they're all beautiful. And those traditions mean a lot, right? They're very impactful, very important, very long-lasting traditions. And so how do you create a world where there's that kind of depth to the traditions that people really, really believe in, because they realize that, the reason why this tradition exists is because that's how the system has the best chance of being pro-human, or that's how the system has the best chance of being pro-freedom, or that's how the system has the best chance of being really easy to use, regardless of someone's technical experience. And so those are the kinds of things that we think a lot about, because at the end of the day, how someone uses Tari, of course we have our own ideas or, dreams, but it's not really up to us, right? It's up to people who choose to use it. And we just want to make sure that there's a reason for people to want to build on Tari, and that Tari as a protocol has the right functions, features that people need.
This particular conversation makes me think about the whole concept of freedom. What does it mean to have your privacy? Because I think we sort of live in a world where people genuinely don't seem to care that much. Because, all people care about is what's right in front of them.
Sure.
We're becoming this unproductive, just constant scrolling
doom
zombies
scrolling.
of and we're just consuming content, which is only going to get worse. No one's really creating anything, but at the same time, yeah, people just seem to give up this like, oh, I don't care. Like, okay, fine, go look at all of my history. Like I said, I've done nothing wrong. And so I think maybe we are evolving as species in a way that's not so good. But to hear that you think about this area so much, and that's leadership, right? That's you taking a valuable out of your limited time to think for humanity, to be so pro-human. I think that trait, it's number one, admirable, and number two, I think it's going to attract a lot of supporters. Because I consider myself very pro-human. I mean, this is exactly what we are doing. What we're doing is for humanity to prevent World War III by getting people to have more conversation.
I love that.
To bridge cultural gaps and things like that. So I think we should definitely talk more in the future.
Yeah, no, I really, really appreciate it. It's the first time we're meeting, and really appreciate the opportunity and appreciate the conversation. And the one thing that I love for people to know is if you have interest in Tari, you just visit universe.tari.com and you can sign up. And we'd love for you to try it and get your feedback. We'd love for you to be a part of this if you want to.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.